with your sanity and with your faculties intact.
Amen.
That's a fact. Well, we're glad to see everybody. Hope that you enjoyed the time that you had with your families. And this is just a list of stuff that we got coming up in the near future. Oh wait, no, that's not a list. That's some money. And I'll talk about it towards the end. We're getting back into Genesis today. All right. Been away from it for a while, but we're going to go into Genesis, and I'm not going to necessarily take the time to try to cover 6 weeks worth of material to refresh your memory, but hopefully you remember the key points of what we've been studying. We've been dealing with Abraham, as he is now called, and dealing with the process that he goes through, getting to know God from the perspective that he didn't understand or know any of the stuff that we're familiar with at this point about God. He didn't have the Bible, he didn't have the law, there was no Red Sea yet, there was no Ten Commandments. Everything about God was brand new. And so, what does that look like? And we'll be crossing generations, because this takes place over several generations, from Abraham to his son to his grandchildren, and how does God interact with them? And that's what we've been studying and talking about. We've made it to the 18th chapter of Genesis. Abram has, just to try to refresh everybody's memory, because it's been a couple of weeks since we've dealt with this material, Abram gets told to leave the land that he grew up in. He leaves, he goes, he settles in one place, builds an altar, he goes down into Egypt, comes out of Egypt prosperous, takes Lot with him when he leaves his homeland, but goes down into Egypt because of a famine, comes out of Egypt, fights a war, wins the war, and eventually the last thing we did was the circumcision and side chicks, where we dealt with Abram taking Hagar to have a baby with her, and what kind of family conflict and problems that started, and that was the last thing that we dealt with. The 18th and 19th chapters deal with two cities that are very, very well known. If I say the names, you'll have heard them, even if you don't exactly know why you've heard them. They're the cities of Sodom and Gamorrah. A couple of and we're not going to cover all of the 18th chapter. I'm going to read quite a bit of the 19th chapter to you, so that way you can, we can pull some things from it. The 18th chapter, we're going to hit in parts and in spots. Be careful, be careful. How you doing, Sister Francine?
I made it.
Glad to see you.
But I'm glad to be here.
But we're going to start with jump down to the 16th verse of the 18th chapter. The chapter begins with three people travelers coming to visit Abraham. And these three travelers were the Lord and his two companions, or God and his two companions, as this story goes. And Abraham receives them. It was customary that if a traveler came through your camp, that you gave them some water, you gave them a little something to eat, because traveling was amazingly dangerous. You're going through deserts, and like we said, there's not rest stops and stuff that you can hit. So a guest comes into your house, and it was customary and polite. Here, have some water, get something to eat, sit and rest yourself, because you might not get to rest yourself for a long time. So Abraham, these three travelers come, and they come to his camp, and he goes above and beyond. Not only does he give them a little something to eat, he, if I remember correctly, prepares enough food to feed about 60 folks. So instead of just feeding them, they have a feast. He brings them in, and they have this feast, and he's taking care of them and being very hospitable to them. And like I said, this was an incarnation, a personification of God, traveling with two companions. In the 18th chapter, in the 16th verse, it reads, "Then the men got up from their meal and looked out towards Sodom. And as they left, Abram went with them to send them on their way. Should I hide my plan from Abraham, the Lord asked? For Abraham will certainly become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. I've singled him out so he will direct his sons and their families to keep the ways of the Lord by doing what is right and just. Then I will do for Abraham all that I promised." So the Lord told Abram, I have heard a great outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah, because their sin is so flagrant. I am going down to see if their actions are as wicked as I've heard. If not, I want to know. So who all has heard this name of the cities, Sodom and Gomorrah? Anybody? What can anybody tell me about them?
They ran it. They ran that certain part under their own ways.
Mm-hmm.
They honored their own God, not that, not our Father in heaven. And let me see. I'm thinking, pillar of badness all around.
Right. It was not these were not good places. There's a couple of housekeeping items that I want to start with, and they are nitpicky. Well, one of them is not really nitpicky. Maybe neither one of them are. But first thing I want to deal with, and I've heard you hear this, and it's just bringing to awareness, Sodom and Gomorrah are two cities. A lot of times you will hear people talk about Sodom and Gomorrah as though it's one city, like Sodom and Gomorrah is one word, and they say the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom is one city, Gomorrah is another city. These were two cities that God ends up destroying, rains down fire from heaven, and wipes the cities out. Anybody remember why these cities are wiped out?
Because men were laying with men. Just completely sinful.
Your first response was a very common one, because men were laying with men. And this, Walt, you had something?
I was going to say it went much deeper than that. It was in iniquity and the very spirit of the people that dwelt there that resulted in various behaviors, but it wasn't for the behavior that they were punished for. It was for what was in their heart with that whole. And then that's something I think that's important for all of us to get in, because as Christians, we tend to categorize sin, depending on what background you come from. Some churches say smoking and drinking will get you in hell, but you can eat like a glutton. You know, the church social has 5 or 6 plates full of food, and that's okay. But boy, if you're puffing a cigarette outside that church house, you're going to hell.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing is, it's the spirit, what those people had believed, what there was in their hearts. That's what sent that destruction on them. Because it talks about righteousness. And when Abram,
yeah, we'll get there. I know where you're going. I appreciate that. But one of the things I want to bring to your attention is that God does not say that he's going to wipe out Sodom and the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah because of homosexuality. That's a common theme. You will hear a lot of this is a go-to passage for preachers when they want to have a tirade against men laying with men. This is where they'll go, God wiped out the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah because of homosexuality. That's not what the text of the scripture actually says. It's one of these cases. Where they tend to get it from is because in the 19th chapters, we're going to go there. You have scouts who were treated rather inhospitably, and you had men who wanted to lay with these scouts. That's where they come up with the idea from. And like I said, we'll get there to the 19th chapter. But when God presents this to Abram, he doesn't say, I'm going to wipe these people out because homosexuality is rampant in the city. He says it's because of their sin. So it's understandable where it comes from, but we've talked about proof texting before, and the mistake of taking a passage that doesn't say something and assuming it says what we want it to say. People see the story of Sodom and Gomorrah as a case of homosexuality because that's where they want to derive it from. But God doesn't say these people are condemned to destruction because of the homosexuality that ran rampant in there. He says it's because of sin, one of which was homosexuality, but like Walt said, it wasn't even the behavior, it was the spirit of them. But I want you to understand, it's not appropriate to use this verse to deal with whether or not homosexuality is a sin or not. There's other verses. There's plenty of other verses that you can deal with, and I'm not going to get into those because that's not the point of this discussion, that you can use to address that. And you'll hear people do it, you may hear bishops do it, because everybody's got their habits but this passage is not, this entire chapter, this section and this incident is not about men laying with men as much as it is about the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, it's unclear what standard God's using to determine what's sinful at this point in biblical history. Obviously, there was a problem since it came up before God, but we don't really know how God was evaluating and determining what was sinful and not sinful at this point. One of the things that we've talked about is this is before the law. This is before the Ten Commandments were handed down. So what set of ideas was God using to judge their sinfulness? We don't really know. Maybe it was violation of natural law. And in the book of Romans, Paul talks about people that don't have the law violating natural law or the law of their conscience and being condemned according to that. Possibly that's what it could have been, is that there's just some stuff that's natural and everybody understands, and they just messing up all of it. And so now I got to deal with this. That's a possibility. There was something called the Noahide laws or code, which we don't talk about a lot, and I'm not going to spend time dealing with it, but there were some codes and laws that were established with Noah that people were supposed to abide by, and maybe they found themselves in violation of that. Or we really don't know if God dealt with these cities sometime in the past. It's real sketchy. We don't know. Usually when God's going to wipe somebody out, he tends to warn them before he does it. So it's real touchy. We don't know. And that's why you can't definitively say that this is why he wiped them out. All we can say is that they were sinful by whatever standard God was evaluating that at that time and dealing with those people. And he determined that he was going to destroy them. So that's a major housekeeping issue I want you guys to take with you. Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed because of sin. And that's as much as we know. So one of the interesting things about this passage that I read to you that I want to highlight and bring out is that God deals with Abraham on the basis of who he's going to be instead of who he is. What we read was that when the men got up, 2 men left and went towards Sodom, and the Lord asked himself, should I hide my plan from Abraham? For Abraham will certainly become a great nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. What that means is that God has with his companions, these are divine beings. This is divinity. This is God and 2 heavenly companions. And God decides to bring Abram into his business. Abraham has nothing to do with the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. He has no jurisdiction there. It's not like, there's no reason for God to include him in this conversation. That's God's business. Whether I wipe out a city or don't wipe out a city, I'm God. I can make that decision on my own. But God invites Abraham into his business and discusses his business with him. Now, we've talked about the inside-outsider culture before, that you've got your insiders and you've got your outsiders, and you don't discuss business with outsiders. They don't have a right to know it. They've got no business knowing. So essentially what God's doing when he decides to have this conversation with Abraham is elevating him to a celestial or divine level of priority. He's discussing with Abraham stuff that is the business of God. This person who is a nomad, this person who has no legitimate heir yet, this person who we've talked about the situation, the circumstances that Abraham found himself in at the time. There was no reason for Abraham was really not much of anybody, but God deals with him on the basis not of who he is, but on the basis of who God has declared that he's going to be. He looks at Abraham and doesn't regard him according to his current situation. He says that this man is going to be somebody, and so I'm going to start dealing with him now according to the promises that haven't yet been fulfilled, because he is somebody, even though his current situation doesn't say that. It's important to understand that that is how God tends to see and tends to deal with us. He knows where we're headed. He knows where we're going. He understands the trajectory of our lives, and will oftentimes deal with us in ways that are different than the way we see ourselves. He will put us in situations that seem above our pay grade, that seem like they're a little bit overwhelming and past what we know we're capable of handling, and wondering, how did I find myself in this situation or in this stuff? I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know. I'm not wise enough to figure this out. I'm not important enough to have had this situation dumped in my lap. I don't understand why I'm being brought into something that you tell me you're going to wipe out a city. What am I supposed to do with that? If somebody from the National Security Agency came to ask you and discuss issues of national security with you. What am I supposed to do? Why would you have this conversation with me? I got nothing to do with this. But Abram was not defined by his current situation or who he was at the time. God saw there is promise. He says, for he will certainly become a mighty nation. So since that's who I know, since I know that's where you're going, and we're here and I'm having this conversation, let me talk with you about some God business. We don't necessarily think about that when we talk about being Christians. To the people that heard this, it would have been astounding to them that God was telling them what they were going to do, that they were bringing him in. It's sending a message to the hearers that Abram had audience with God, and had such audience with God that God was talking with him about his plans. That's not something that you just normally do. Like I said, there's this division, and was even sharper back then between us and them. And it means that Abram has been elevated, this man with no heir, this man, like I said, he's being elevated to a position that is, I don't want to say deistic or celestial, but he's been bumped up in importance and stature and status of who he is. God doesn't discuss with me what cities he's going to destroy. I've never had that conversation with him before. But he does on occasion allow things to come into my life that leave me confused and wondering what in the world am I doing in the middle of this. It's happened. I don't know if I'm the only person that's happened to, or if that's unique. I don't think it's unique to me. He deals with us based on who we're going to be. Most of us derive our identity from our present circumstance as well as from the messaging that we receive from those who are in our social circles rather than from our promise. God has promised me that this is who I'm going to be. He's shown me that I have this capability within me. He's shown me that this seed is within me, but I'm not there yet. And the hardest thing to do sometimes is see myself through the lenses of where I'm headed and believe that even though I'm not there, this is who I am, and this is the trajectory my life is on, is that the promise of greatness that I have, the promise of abundance that he's given me. Maybe I don't consider my situation abundant living yet, but I'm on my way there. Maybe I don't consider myself having fulfilled the potential of my gifting yet, but I am on my way there, and the situations and the circumstances that I have to deal with that don't make sense, that seem like they're above my pay grade, are situations where God is trusting me with something not according to if God had to judge me according to where I am or dealt with me according to where I am now, I might not be here.
Oh.
If he looked at one of us at the wrong time in our lives or at the wrong period in our lives and dealt with us according to who we were at that point in time, some of y'all might not be here. But he looks and sees this is who they are going to be. And his grace and his mercy and his love says, I'm going to handle them and deal with them based on who they're going to be rather than who they are, because that's what's real. That's what's true. They have potential, and I'm going to entrust them with situations that challenge their sense of identity and make them step up and become something other than what they thought they were, because that's the reality of who they are. I'm trying to show them something about themselves. I'm trying to help them understand something about themselves. And that's where what we take from this example, it should cause us to challenge. Actually, let me not get ahead of myself. Let me back up and not get ahead of myself. Like I said, God will periodically decide to deal with us in ways that challenge us. Overwhelming circumstances that are facilitated by God are opportunities for elevation. Take that with you. Things that seem overwhelming, things that seem too complicated for me to handle, things that break me down to my knees and leave me scratching my head and maybe sitting in a dark room fussing at a wall. That's what I'm like. I sit in a dark room and fuss at absolutely nobody. But those things that come are opportunities to elevate us. They're God saying, you are more than what you think you are now. And so we talk about rejoicing in our trials and tribulations, but there is something to be said about the idea that God counts us as worthy to deal with these things, to have these things presented to us, because he sees us as greater than we see ourselves. And we've talked about the fact that one of the challenges of life is to learn how to see myself the way that God sees me. Well, this is a perfect example of where he's presenting something to somebody that's got no business knowing what he's doing, no reason to share it with them, but he has promise. There's something in him that I've already said I'm going to do. And so let me start dealing with him now according to that, because there's going to be greatness that's going to come out of him. And his children are going to be to this world something that deserves, if I'm not using too strong of a word, deserves or warrants, makes it appropriate for me to bring them into my business and to discuss with them what's going to happen. So that's something that we overlook that's huge, is that God even bothered to tell him this. Questions, comments, thoughts at this point? Something else we want to take, moving on. So God tells Abram that I'm going to wipe this city out. Abraham, from that point, decides to go into negotiations with God, which is where Walt wanted to go to. I appreciate him letting me get there. 18:24 through 28. Suppose Abram asks God, suppose you find 50 righteous people living there in the city. Will you still sweep it away and not spare it for their sakes? Surely you wouldn't do such a thing, destroying the righteous along with the wicked. Why would you be treating the righteous and the wicked exactly the same? Surely you wouldn't do that. Should not the judge of all the earth do what's right? And the Lord replied, if I find 50 righteous people in Sodom, I'll spare the entire city for their sake. Then Abraham spoke again. Since I've begun, let me speak a little bit further, my Lord, even though I'm but dust and ashes. Suppose there's only 45 people rather than 50. Will you destroy the whole city for a lack of 5 folks? For a lack of 5? And then the Lord said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 righteous people there. And that conversation continues until Abram and God come to a happy number of 10. If I can find 10 righteous folks, I won't wipe the city out. I don't know how many of you have ever considered negotiating with God before, or bargaining with God before. It's something that, like you said, you laugh, you get a smirk, and I got looked at sideways. That just seems a little bit weird. This is God. What am I going to do? Negotiate? It was a little bit more intense back then because their belief was that, they were still back in the God will smite you days. We don't necessarily have that perspective yet, but gods didn't take too kindly to mortals questioning their directives and their imperatives. So how dare Abraham be so bold as to ask God about his business? Well, the flip side of that is God brought me into his business. I'm not allowed to ask questions. That's debatable, but it was unusual. This entire discourse through the remainder of the chapter, when he gets down to 10 people, served as an affirmation of the loving nature of Abram's God to the people who, remember, this is a story that was passed along orally. This was something that was told to children and children's children. And when they hear this, it lets them know God must be a really patient and loving God, because most of these other gods that I've heard of would have wiped him out for asking a question that's stupid. How dare you question whether or not the God of all the earth is going to do right? This is my business. And some of us can understand that because we know what it's like when we have people try to get in our business and tell us what we ought to do, and we don't necessarily take too kindly to it either. But it serves as an affirmation of God, the loving nature of Abram's God, as well as the unimaginable nature of the relationship between God and Abraham, which by extension applied to Abraham's descendants. That Abraham would question God and live to tell about it was miraculous. That God actually responded to Abraham's inquiries was even bigger. I mean, first of all, you got God, how dare Abraham ask God these questions, and he lived to tell about it? That's amazing. But then God actually has a conversation with him about it. It speaks to a very special and unique relationship that God has with Abraham, by extension that God has with Israel, and by extension that God has with us. Okay. When we think about, like I said, who among us is going to think about trying to negotiate with God over something? I can't sit, aside from saying, Lord, if you get me, especially when I was a teenager or when I was living my parents, God, if you get me out of this whooping, I ain't never going to do this again. And then there was some other stuff as I got a little bit older than getting whooped. Lord, if you help me, then that kind of bargaining is, we try to do. But God, this don't quite seem right. What if this, and are you going to still do that? And well, how about this? And 50, that's not something we think that we have a right to be able to do, and that we feel comfortable asking God about his business, because that's God's business. But we have to remember he has brought us in and placed us in a position where he's deemed it appropriate to share, and apparently he deems it appropriate for us to have discussions with him about what's going to happen. This should stand as a constant challenge to the fatalistic or deterministic way in which believers understand their relationship with God. There's some folks who say that what God does is what God's going to do, and I got nothing to do with it, and I got nothing to say about it, and it's just what he does, and whatever the Lord wants to have happen in my life is what's going to happen in my life, and I'm going to just go along for the ride. God's sovereignty, God is sovereign. What God wants to see transpire is going to transpire. But there's a tension there that exists where we should not be so consumed with God's sovereignty and his omnipotence and his omniscience that we don't feel it's appropriate to actually ask and discuss what's going on in our lives or what's happening in the lives of our loved ones and the things surrounding us. Because, God says, all right, you want 50 people? Fine, 50. Well, what about 5? It doesn't make much sense for you to destroy the other 45 for the lack of 5 people. All right, fine, 45. Well, what about 40? And, at that point, I'm like, man, go somewhere. Because I don't have the patience to sit there. Look, I'm wiping them out. You might not like it, but that's tough. But instead, he sits there and has this back and forth. So those of us, this passage points to a problem. I won't say it's invalid or it's untrue, but those people who believe that it's just God's sovereign will that drives everything and we're just passengers and victims of circumstance and happenstance and whatever God wants to have happen is what's going to happen and I got no say in it. This challenges that a little bit. There's a tension there. There's a balance. What God wants to have happen, it's going to happen within a specific context of discussion. But the other side of it is that for believers, those of us who have been called into being Christians and have accepted that call and walked with him faithfully, he brings us in and we can actually talk about what's going on and what's going to happen. Understand that if you take the conversation at face value, and it's a valid question to ask. You've got a whole city of folks, but if there's 50 righteous people there, that doesn't quite seem fair to me to wipe out these 50 righteous people with everybody else. Now, it was common practice for the righteous people to have to suffer the punishment of the unrighteous people, but it doesn't seem fair. So I ask God, this does not seem fair. Should not the God of, or will not the God of all the earth, or should not the God of all the earth do what's right? If you're the God of all the earth, this doesn't seem fair to me. And what God could have asked him is, who are you to question what's fair? He doesn't do that. Now, at one point in the book, we could go to Job and we see a different kind of discourse, but we're not going to backtrack to that. We're going to deal with what we got in front of us. He doesn't say, you got no business asking me these questions. How dare you question my fairness? I'm God. We'll talk about it. And so what we see in this passage, if you take it at face value, is Abram trying to struggle with and figure out, how is this fair? And eventually they get down to a number that Abraham says, okay, I get it. If you can't find 10 good people, wipe them out. He doesn't say that, but it makes sense now. I understand it. It seems fair to me. There's plenty of occasions in life and throughout history that God sometimes does not seem fair. And people all the time talk about it. It doesn't make sense. Bible critics and agnostics take it as a reason. I don't believe in this God because he doesn't seem fair. And what's fair about a kid that's born with cerebral palsy? And what's fair about this? And what's fair about that? And I don't believe in this God. Very few of them will actually go and ask God, this doesn't make any sense to me. I'm struggling with this. I'm having a hard time with this. Well, life does not seem fair. It doesn't seem fair that this has happened to me. I didn't do anything. It doesn't seem fair that such and such is treating me this way. I didn't do anything. It doesn't seem fair that the company's going out of business, that these things are happening. It doesn't seem fair that somebody left me. It doesn't seem fair that life is full of unfair stuff. Some of it we blame God for, and God's got nothing to do with it. Some things you can believe happen by divine appointment, but it doesn't seem like it's fair. And we get mad at God and stop talking to God rather than asking him because we don't think that we've got a right to ask, or we don't think we're going to get an answer, or we might not get the answer that we like. God engages Abram and actually has a conversation with him to the point where Abram can say, okay, 10's fair. 10 seems fair. And the approach is predicated on the idea that even though God doesn't seem fair, I believe he's a fair God. That's the premise that Abraham takes this entire conversation from. God, this does not seem fair, but I believe you are a fair God. So how do we figure out how to make sense out of this? And he invites that kind of conversation. That's relationship right there. That's what interpersonal relationships look like. This doesn't seem like it makes sense. I think you're this kind of person. How do I make sense out of these two? I can disbelieve everything I believed about who the person is, or I can wrestle with them and try to figure out how do we make these two fit? So this is what we're seeing. And there's something kind of funny about these negotiations. Any questions or comments or thoughts so far? The randomness of it. How did Abram come up with the number 50? We don't know. But he gets to 50 and he gets a concession on 50, and then he says, well, what about 5 less? And you go, well, okay, fine, 45. And then what about 5 less? That's kind of reminds me of kids a little bit, who are constantly trying to test the boundaries of what you set. Okay, you got a 10 o'clock curfew. Well, they come in at 10:05. All right, well, fine, 10:30. We'll make your curfew 10:30. 10:35 rolls over. All right, we'll make your curfew 11 o'clock. 11:05. All right. Well, at some point in time, how's that's human nature. It's human nature, but that's what's happening here. And the numbers just seem to pop out of thin air. Realistically, Abraham just didn't want to see Sodom destroyed. Abraham did not want to see Sodom destroyed, and we'll talk about why in a second. So all this negotiating and this whittling down these numbers was really just Abraham trying to get to and bargain out an agreement whereby Sodom might have a chance of surviving. And a lot of times when you see people that are constantly testing the boundaries and constantly pushing the boundaries, it's because really they just want to do what they want to do. It tends, that's what the tendency is. When somebody can't ever follow what you're telling them and can't ever respect the boundaries, we're going to start, service is going to be at 12 o'clock and we're going to start at 12 o'clock on the dot. Nobody rolls around until 12:05, 12:50. All right, let's start having service at 12:30. 12:35, 12:40, 12:45. All right, why don't we try to have a 10 o'clock service so that way we can actually get everybody in and out on time. 10:30, 10:45 rolls around, because people's schedules and their routine. You can try to move the line, but at the end of the day, folks want to do what they... And that it's human nature. And God doesn't necessarily chastise for that, but he calls us to try to do better and to understand what's happening. Abram's real concern with Sodom was that his son, his nephew's son, Lot. And who can remind me why we called him a nephew's son? What were we saying?
I saw because of his brother's son and his brother passed away.
And his brother passed away, and what does that mean for Abram?
When you got old, that's like a sibling kid.
Right.
When you pass away.
When you pass away, that becomes your responsibility to take that kid and to raise them. So Abram raised him as a son, but it was his nephew, and his nephew's son was living in Sodom, and if he wipes him out, then Lot's gone with him. So, and it's another thing that's funny about it. Why didn't Abram just ask about Lot? That seems like it would have been a more direct approach, but that's not what he did. Instead, he tried to broker a deal, which is kind of what the culture was. You negotiate, you work. He never just said, God, I'm worried about Lot. What about my son? I don't want to see him destroyed with the rest of the city. Now, one thing I want you to know, and we're doing actually pretty decent on time. I wasn't sure if we were going to get through everything, but we just might manage to pull this off. Ultimately, Sodom ends up getting destroyed. Gamorrah ends up getting destroyed. So all this negotiation didn't change what was actually going to come to pass at the end of the day. Was it a waste of time to go through the process? Yes? No? Who says yes? Who says no? It was not a waste of time to go through the process. Why? What difference did it make? It ended up destroying the city anyway.
But it brought him closer to God. It brought him closer to his purpose.
I love that answer. What?
Not only that, but when he did that, it gave God an opportunity, actually gave Abraham an opportunity to demonstrate his nature to God and to see what kind of person he was. And sometimes I can speak on personal experience. You pray for things, and believe it or not, God always gives you an answer. Sometimes it's not the answer you want, but you get an answer. And when it doesn't happen the way you wish it would or you think it should, then that's the real test of whether you're faithful to God.
Yes.
And then you can bring Job into that too, because his wife said, why don't you just curse God and die? Be done with it. Look what all has happened. He says, I ain't doing that. And he blessed God instead. And that's where the real rubber meets the road. When we have things come up in our lives that we don't get the car we want, the wife dies, the kid goes to jail or whatever, you know. And then you're sitting there and going, man, I don't, you know, that's not supposed, what never says in this book, that's not supposed to happen. He says, I'll be with you through it. But, and sometimes you do see deliverance. I've seen some of my a couple of nephews and a son healed from cancer. So there's 3 that got healed. So it doesn't always happen the way you want. Sometimes it does. But the key is what is our attitude, or what is our relationship with God when we go through this stuff? And I think that's part of why he let him talk to him and negotiate with him.
Right, I completely agree. Now, all this time, Sodom and Gomorrah, most of the time, like I said, you hear a decent message about homosexuality. But look at all this stuff we just talked about. Look at how many things were at play in this chapter that, for most of the time, it gets skipped over as a prelude to Lot's wife and the pillar of salt, which we're going to get into now. But this is one of the things I'm trying to make sure that you guys see as you read through these things, that these are human moments. These are human situations and circumstances where God is showing himself to people in ways that they didn't know and understand, because they didn't have this on record. So understand that, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on, and that's why we're going through this. So, like I said, or any other questions or comments before we keep moving? All right. So, Sodom and Gomorrah do end up being destroyed, and this I'm going to read through with you, and do a little bit of discussion, and we'll finish this up and get wrapped up. So where we left off was that God had sent, the 2 visitors there were 3 people that came to visit Abram. 2 of them left, and then Abram had this conversation with God. For the 2 that left, the 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we're going to spend the night in the square. That was a really bad idea, because the square was a very dangerous place. We don't have time to talk about that now, or the geography. That would make for an interesting study. But, you know, in a dangerous city, it would be like, we're going to camp out outside on Wildwood. Bad idea. Okay, the other parts of town. Well, I'm going to just go hang out here at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to just look around and see what happens. And so Lot's concerned about their safety. But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, where are the men who came with you tonight? Bring them out to us so we can have sex with them. And this is where they get homosexual, Sodom was destroyed because of homosexuality. That was just an incident. Bring these dudes up, bring these men out so we can have sex with them. Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, no, my friends, do not do this wicked thing. Look, I got 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them, but don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof. Let me stop there and let's hammer this out, because I got some looks, and so we got to deal with this a little bit. Because there's some.
It's going down well.
Boy, oh boy.
I got some looks and some stuff. So this is a tough passage for a lot of folks to deal with. How in the world is this man going to offer up his 2 daughters to these virgin daughters who, in place of these guests? Well, we got to come, like, that's hard for us to rationalize. You got to protect your own. You got to protect your own house. That's a Western way of thinking. There's one side of this where you have to understand that in the East, and even today, like you go to Afghanistan, you go to Pakistan, if you take a guest into your house, you are honor bound by whatever God you believe in to protect them with your life. If you don't, it is an act of utmost dishonor. And I believe that they can put you to death if you fail to do so, technically. And I'm not positive about that, but it is a big deal. You are expected to take it. What was the name of that? It wasn't Last Man Standing, was it?
Sole Survivor.
Sole Survivor, right. Where, if you've never seen the movie, it's a really good movie, where an American soldier, and this actually happened within the last 10 years, American soldier, Marcus Luttrell, was injured in Afghanistan, I think it was Afghanistan, broken leg, shattered spine, because he was out scouting and one of the Taliban scouts saw them and they had to get away and he barely got away. He drug himself with his knife 6 miles, I think, to the nearest town. And somebody took him into their house and was caring for him. Well, word got out to the Taliban that this American soldier was in this man's house. And the man who took him in armed himself and defended this American soldier. And you know, I don't have to explain to you what that is. With guns. Had kids in the house, Taliban comes up, guns blazing, and defends this man till the Marines can come in and get him out. That's today. That's the magnitude and the intensity of the responsibility for those who follow the custom and the tradition of that world. Now, what's interesting is that's how you're supposed to act, but here you've got the Taliban saying, let us have him, we don't care about what this rule is. So hypocrisy runs deep, human-wide. But that's what's expected. So the fact that Lot was so concerned about and not willing to let these men come in and be killed, or let these men be taken and be raped, comes from that tradition. And like I said, it's something that has held on to itself throughout the ages. Now, the issue of him offering up his daughters, still challenging. Maybe it makes a little bit more sense. You also have to keep in mind, and this doesn't seem right to us because we're much more evolved now, but women were considered kind of disposable property. That's a tough thing to say, but that's, we talked about Sarah. If she can't have a baby, what are you good for? And women were, they didn't have the I am women, hear me roar type mentality that we deal with now. So there's some question as to how they would have actually seen. Maybe, and this is hypothetical, this is just a maybe, okay? Maybe to the people hearing that, exchanging your daughters for the sake of protecting your guests was an honorable thing because you are fulfilling your commitment to these guests. And even though it seems unthinkable by our standards, women are of less honor. You have these guests here and you have to protect the honor of your family and your name. And so if I got to make a decision about which one's going to go and which one I got to sacrifice, it's more honorable for me to protect these folks than it is for me to protect my household or protect these girls. I suspect if it would have been sons, you might have ended up seeing a different conversation. This is all conjecture. This is just kind of educated perspective, ways of bouncing this around. Now, there's another way of looking at this that may make it be a little bit easier to process. And this comes from Walton's material. I hadn't necessarily seen it, but it was interesting to see. Lot's response to the demand of the men is startling. Was he really offering his daughters to be gang raped and probably murdered? An alternative is that his suggestion implied a more subtle, I would just as soon as you violate my family members as violate those who I've taken in and offered hospitality. Sarcasm is something that, you have to remember that this was originally transmitted orally. Sarcasm in text form is kind of tough to pick up on. Like anybody who's ever been in a fight over a text message that was supposed to be a joke should be able to understand that there's some stuff in text form that doesn't necessarily get picked up as it would if it was being spoken. So the possibility is, and what Walton tends to believe, and Walton is an expert in this, is that there may have been some subtle subtext that we don't pick up in. Whereas, you know what, you want these folks, well, why, you might as well take my daughters. You're doing the same thing to me. So maybe that could be where this is coming from as well. So those gives you hopefully that gives you a couple of things to chew on to try to understand where this is coming from. Go ahead, Walt.
Especially, that's a good point you make, Pastor, because especially since this is transmitted or shared orally but written down along Hebraic culture, and Hebraic culture being part Jewish myself, real big on saying, why don't you just kill me? Go ahead, drive the knife right here, come on. You know, but if you wrote that down and had that as a response,
it looks like a suicide note.
But he's not saying that. And you could see, and I could very well understand him saying, take my daughters. Why don't you take my daughters? They're virgins. Have them. You know, why don't you do that while you're at it?
Yeah.
And they're looking at, and of course, they are from the same culture. They're, get out of the way. You know, that's not what this is all about. Here's what we want.
So this is one of those challenges, those passages that's challenging. You kind of have to dig at it to understand what's going on. And ultimately, we can't really be positive about it. All we know is that the story is that it happened. But to understand it in some way, it doesn't seem quite so primitive. You have to understand what's going on and what's at play here. So hopefully that helps you out. Gonna go a little bit further, and hopefully we get through. Yeah, I think we'll get through it. Questions, comments before we keep moving? And we're just about to the end of where I want to get to. But the men, get out of our way, they replied. This fellow came here as a foreigner, outsider. This man came in as a foreigner, and now he wants to be our judge. We'll treat you worse than them. They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. But the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness, so they could no longer find the door. Then the two men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, son-in-laws, sons or daughters, anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons, or to his sons-in-law who were pledged to marry his daughters. I just picked that up. Son-in-laws who were pledged, these women were already engaged.
How are you someone that was already having some?
Well, that adds to the question of whether or not this was sarcastic. So Lot went to his sons-in-law, who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city. But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. With the coming of the dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished. When he hesitated, the men grabbed his hand and the hands of his wife and his daughters and led them to safety out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. I want you to get the insanity of the situation. He pulls Lot in the house, strikes everybody blind, says, get your folks and get out of here. Tells his sons-in-law, it's a joke. The next day comes by. Now, if you tell me, if I see you strike a whole bunch of folks blind and tell me to get up and go, I'm gone that night. But because his son-in-law said it was a joke, he stayed there. You're about to be wiped out. Something bad is coming if you don't get out of here. If you don't leave your home, if you don't leave, something terrible is going to happen. And he just stays there the next night. Next dawn comes up. They say, look, get your folks, take what you can carry, and get out of here. Lot still like, oh. They have to go and let's go. To get him, you can understand. Well, pick him up and drag them out to get them to get up and move. It seems ridiculous to us until we think about some of the folks that we deal with and trying to get them. If you don't change, your life is going to come crashing down on you. If you don't do, and have to go and grab it, and sometimes you want to grab them by the collar and shake them by the neck. If you don't straighten up, your whole life is going to come up crashing down. It seems funny when we look at it, but then we realize that we've all lived it.
Amen.
And we've all, at some point in time, had somebody try to tell us, if you don't straighten up, your life is going to be a mess. And we sit there and we look at them and we think it's a joke. And then the next day comes and they say, if you don't get yourself straight, your whole life's going to come crashing down on you. And we're like, well, maybe I should. If you don't get yourself up.
Yeah. Yep.
We've all lived it. We've all been there. And we all see it happen to people that we love and care about and that are connected to us. And it's a frustrating circumstance. Pending doom is coming. This stuff is not, you think it's funny, but it's not a joke. Bad's about to happen. I'm trying to deliver you, and you sitting around laughing. I'm trying to protect you from what realistically you live there, wipe you out with everybody else. But I'm trying to protect you. I'm trying to deliver you. I'm trying to put you in a safe place. I'm trying to make sure that you can continue and that you live on. And we sit. Okay, I'll get to it. All right, I'll get right on that as soon as I get done. What would make somebody leave, be so hesitant to leave? Smoke alarms start in the house. And you're like, well, I'll get out eventually. We don't understand necessarily sometimes the threats that God protects us from, the warnings that exist, and how patient He is with us. If it was me and I told you that I'm about to burn this thing down, and you stay there the next day, you're just going to burn with everybody else. I done warned you.
Yeah.
Look how patient God is with us, how He's willing to continue to wrestle, to the point that sometimes He can manipulate circumstances and situations to drag you out. Kicking and screaming out of where you are, because where you are is a place that's going to get you killed. Metaphorically, sometimes literally. Questions, comments, thoughts? Let's see here. So when he hesitated, the men grabbed his hand in the hands of his wife and his two daughters and led them safely out the city. For the Lord was merciful to them. Thank God for His mercy.
Amen.
Thank God for His mercy. As soon as they had brought them out, one said, "Flee for your lives. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away." Now let's talk about this don't look back thing, because I'm trying to make sure that we do this as expeditiously as possible. Don't look back. The angel's protection or the angel's prohibition did not concern looking at the destruction. After all, the people standing on the wall of Zor would have been able to watch the carnage take place. We should notice that when the angel gave the instruction not to look back, it was placed between two other commands. If the prohibition was not concerned not concerned with seeing the destruction, it seems that these three commands form a sequence. Get out of here, don't turn back, don't stop before reaching the destination. The verb look must therefore have been an idiomatic value. The implication is that Lot's wife returned to Sodom. In this interpretation, the command of the angel is broken not by glancing over one's shoulder and seeing what should not be seen, but in directing one's attention and returning back to the city. So just to try to move along a little bit with this, most of us are familiar. He tells them, get out, get to another city. Go, the angels tell him, leave. Don't look back. And most of us know that at some point in time, Lot's wife looks back and is turned to a pillar of salt. We'll talk about what that means in a second. We've heard that story. And most of the time, here, let me read a little bit more and then we'll get there. But Lot said, flee for your lives, don't look back, don't stop anywhere in the plain, flee to the mountain or you'll be swept away. But Lot said to them, no, my lords, please, your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountain, this disaster will overtake me and I'll die. Look, here's a town small enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared. He said to him, very well, I will grant this request to you. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly because I cannot do anything until you reach it. I cannot do anything. I don't have time. I cannot do anything till you reach it. I cannot do anything. I don't have time. I wish I did. I cannot do anything till you reach it. I cannot do anything until 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 you we talk about the idea that sometimes the judgment of God is held back because he's being merciful and trying to make sure that somebody gets away, that somebody gets here. I'm about to wipe this place out, but I can't do nothing until you get there. Thank God for his mercy. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plan, destroying all those living cities and also the vegetation in the lands. But Lot's wife looked back and she became a pillar of salt. So this is the way I've usually heard this said. We're running and we hear something behind us, and Lot's wife looks back and all of a sudden she turns into a pillar of salt, but Lot kept moving on because he'd been told not to move.
Right.
We have to understand what we just read said that Lot made it to Zoar. They got away. So this destruction didn't come while they were running and she happened to look back. They got where they were going. They had gotten to a place of safety. And what we just got done reading from the commentary is that looking back wasn't just looking at the destruction, but it actually was looking back in terms of thinking about what you left behind, thinking about the stuff you couldn't take with you, and that what most likely happens is that Lot's wife goes back and gets swept up in the destruction. Being turned into a pillar of salt was a little bit euphemistic. Let me give you this. This not being turned into a pillar of salt need not be seen as an arbitrary instantaneous transformation. The destruction described in terms of burning sulfur and brimstone and fire that God rained down on the city, when we understand that, burning down fire and brimstone that God rained down on the city. Since the destruction did not begin until Lot and his daughters had reached Zoar, we should assume that Lot's wife didn't simply glance back, but returned to the city and was swept up into destruction like everyone else in the city. There was a lot of pillars of salt in Sodom that day. So pillar of salt was a euphemism for burnt up bodies. Crispy folks. I'm sorry. So, where was I going? So, it's not that she just looks back, but she probably goes back. Maybe she realized she forgot her favorite pair of shoes or whatever it was, or family heirlooms or something, but something prompted her to go back. She had gotten out of the city, gotten away, gotten safe, and looked back, and something prompted her. That doesn't seem to make sense. That can seem, I'm sitting here watching this destruction. I'm in a safe place. God, he done told me 3 times to get out, drug me by the hand. We negotiated about where I was going to end up. I finally got there, and then we do it all the time. I don't know.
She had some doubt, maybe?
She left her whole life behind.
Yeah.
And was it a Canaanite wife or a Sodomite wife? She might have been from Sodom. I'd have to go back and double check that.
Right. The fact that Lot chose, remember when they divided,
Right, when they divided up the land.
he chose those cities to live on the plain. So he probably got a wife from that area because he didn't have a woman with him in
Right.
any of the
I
accounts.
didn't think so.
So when he went there, he probably settled down and married some gal there, and then married her, and so then you have children that have grown up there, went to high school there, you know, and all that good stuff, and then all of a sudden you got to pull up and leave without taking anything.
Yeah, grab what you can carry. Well, you got photo albums, you got mementos, you got all this stuff that you left behind in your whole life. And let me see if I can run in here and grab this real quick. Every man that's waited on a woman to leave the house knows what that feels like. Yes, I'm taking you out to dinner.
That means I'll get dessert too.
You will get dessert too. But maybe I need to go back and grab. Let me see what I can run back and grab this. The house burning down. I might have to go back and get my guitars. I don't know. So, everybody's got their song. Anyway, I want you to understand this, that God had delivered Lot and his wife, and she went back and was destroyed. You get people who get out of bad relationships, abusive relationships, bad situations, turn around, go right back in, and we wonder where that comes from and why does it happen. I want you to understand the nature of intercessory prayer, because this is where we're going. Remember, I told you I was going to pull a Mother's Day thought from out of this at one point. We pray for our loved ones. We pray that God protect them. We pray that God delivers them. All he can do is deliver them. He can clear a path, maybe even drag them out. If they turn around and go back, what more is God going to do with that? The way intercessory prayer works, we can pray and God intervene on behalf of our loved ones, on behalf of our family, on behalf of our children, on behalf of our parents, and God can blaze a trail and work a miracle and get them out. And they end up back in the same situation, and we're wondering, well, how come my prayers aren't being answered? I got them out. Mm-hmm. They decided to go back in.
Yes.
And so the burden is still there, but don't think that your prayers aren't being answered because you haven't seen them come back out. The fact sometimes that they get out the crack house, the fact that they get out of the shootout, the fact that they get out of the house with their heads still attached to their bodies and just a bruise on their face, the fact that they get out, interceding prayer, intercessory prayer, God working on their behalf, on your behalf, God answering the prayers that you haven't necessarily asked, but you tried to negotiate with God over the situation when instead of asking, but God knew what was in your hearts.
Right.
The last verse that we're going to, but God had listened to Abraham's request to keep Lot safe. Lot never came out, Abram never came out and said, keep Lot safe. But God knew through the midst of all that negotiating, Abraham's worried about Lot. So I'm going to make sure Lot's okay. He knows better than we do when we're sitting there trying to fumble around and fiddle around instead of just directly talking to him about what's on our heart. He can know and understand what's driving you and the passions, and still respond and intervene with a divine love and power. Some of us, well, you should have asked for what you wanted. Maybe you'd have got it. No, God says, I understand what's going on in your heart, and I'm going to bless, I'm going to move because you're a person of promise, because you are in an exalted position, because I brought you into my business. I'm going to answer those prayers that you're not necessarily praying because you think I don't know what's going on. So he knew what he wanted, what Abraham wanted, and delivered Lot because of it. And the other thing that you have to understand is that Lot survived because of Abraham's relationship with God. If we would have met on Mother's Day, what I would have said is that there's a lot of us that are still walking around here because of our mothers and our grandmothers' relationships with God. The thing that protects our kids, in spite of how messed up the situations get, we're worried, Lord, don't let my baby, don't let it happen. Don't let them be snatched up when they're walking in the streets in the middle of the night. Don't let them fall prey to a stray bullet. Don't let them get, is these mothers' prayers and relationships that kept us and preserved us when we were living where we thought we wanted to live, doing the things that we thought we wanted to do. God preserved us because we had a mother, because we had a grandmother that had a relationship with God. And God knew it was important to that mother, to that grandmother, that family member, that son, that daughter, that brother, that husband not fall into the consequences of their decision. And so he puts a hedge around them and delivers them on account of somebody's mother's prayers. And that would have been the Mother's Day thought to pull from that, is to understand. But you have to understand the nature of intercessory prayer. You've got Lot who was delivered. You've got Lot's wife who was delivered and turned around and went back in. Mm-hmm. Prayers were answered. God interceded. But the most God can do is deliver us. It's up to us to maintain our deliverance.
That's right.
Because some of us will run right back into bondage. Mm-hmm. Because family members don't like the fact that we're walking in liberty. Because friends, and we've talked, friends look at you like you're funny, and because you think, or say you think you're better than them. Once God has delivered us, our responsibility and our obligation is to maintain our deliverance. Get up, get out, don't look back. Whatever you left behind is memories of an old life that I'm wiping out. I'm putting you in a place of deliverance where you become a testimony to my love, to my power, to the concern that I have about you. I'm trying to set you aside as a miracle that people can see that I love and care about folks. Don't look back. Don't. And this is where Jesus says, remember Lot's wife. Because he's teaching about people looking back and not being worthy to be a disciple if you put your hand in the plow and turn around. So, questions or comments? As we wrap. There's a few more verses at the end of the chapter that are actually some pretty juicy reading. Like if you want to see some of the messed up stuff that happens in the Bible that nobody talks about, you go read. Let me find where the verses are. Verses 30 through 38. You find out how Lot's wife actually ends up with kids. Or not Lot's wife, but Lot's daughters.
I read that.
Ends up with kids. You read that, Mom?
It's crazy.